Tonight, you're not tuning in to a clear station. You're listening for the quiet between two frequencies. Before you fall asleep, you'll climb a damp hill above the city, find 2 raincoats, 2 lead masks, and 1 neat little note that explains almost nothing. You'll follow radio men who trusted circuits more than rumors, and settle beside a mystery that still hums like static in the dark. Rain ticks on tin somewhere, street signs, car roofs, the shell of a radio. A thin tone fades in and out the way a thought does when you're almost dreaming. Aluminum crinkles like a leaf in the wind. The sky's overcast, but the air feels wired, as if someone, somewhere, has just finished saying your name into a microphone you can't quite hear. If nights like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you whisper where and on what frequency you're listening from, perhaps the next soft hiss of static will remember you there, half awake, while the hill waits and the signal hovers just out of reach. Because tonight's story doesn't shout its secret. It just leaves 2 masks on the grass and lets the radios do the talking. You don't usually expect a pair of handmade lead masks to look polite, but these did, sitting on faces in the grass like 2 gray ovals that had decided to take a nap where the hill was softest. That is our very quiet starting place. Late light, wet blades pressing against trousers, a narrow footpath that climbs Vintem Hill, the way a pencil line climbs a page, neat, patient, and easily smudged. A shower had passed earlier, and every stone had decided to keep a small private puddle, which is the kind of detail stones enjoy. 2 raincoats were folded nearby with the care of men who had argued, not loudly, about creases. Their hands lay at their sides, not clenched or theatrical, as if they had simply stopped in the middle of listening for a sound that might come from above, or from a little black radio that sometimes crackles like frying onions and sometimes hums like a patient refrigerator. The path up is narrow enough that 2 people must briefly perform the small choreography of politeness when another climbs down. A step to the left into a tuft of grass, a murmured apology to a spider, a return to the trodden strip. Anyone who walks it remembers that the city lies behind them and the sea is off to one side, unless memory itself is off to one side that day. At the top, the air feels like it has been recently measured. Not much happens on Vintem Hill, which is precisely why. On that particular afternoon in the 1960s, 2 men brought along a purpose. They were technicians by habit. One sold electronics. The other repaired them. In most stories, this is where the narrator hurries you forward, but we will not hurry. We will stand a moment in the damp and consider how many screws a portable radio needs to feel confident, and whether anyone has ever counted them out loud to comfort the set. Many radios respond well to flattery, especially about their tuning eye. In a pocket, there was a piece of notepad paper. It had simple instructions written in neat lines. The words were calm to the point of seeming tired. Time at the place, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. The last line suggests a certain tender loyalty to valves and dials, as though the men had agreed that if anything odd happened to their minds, they should at least make sure the equipment wore something warm. The paper did not offer a reason, and reasonable papers often don't. There was no dramatic confession, no proclamation of destiny, only the tone of a person who has made a list so that nothing will be forgotten, including the part where one remembers to remember. We like lists for that, even the kind that do not quite explain themselves. A pencil groove left a small ridge along the margin, a tiny landscape in graphite where a decision paused. They were radio men who understood that the sky can be dialed like a number that never quite connects. If you turn the knob slowly enough, you can hear entire weather systems when they decide to gossip. Lightning makes the atmosphere briefly opinionated. Shortwave swells and collapses as if someone is stirring a pot a few clouds away. I don't recommend trying to stir a pot a few clouds away, but if you did, a radio could probably file a report. These men wore solder burns like freckles and kept a certain affection for the smell of flux. which is either charming or worrying depending on how much of it you have inhaled. They believed in the small miracles of coils and condensers, which are simply little agreements disguised as hardware. A promise that if one thing stores a charge and another thing resists a third thing, music or a voice or nonsense, will pass through politely and take a seat. They thought about time as a schedule of sky. A front moves in. Reception changes. Dusk slides a finger along the frequencies until a station you couldn't hear earlier appears faintly, like a neighbor who has stopped to tie a shoe. The plan, as far as anyone can tell from the notepad, and from the way the afternoon was arranged, involved timing the air. It is a quaint idea, like timing bread, only the oven is very large, and everyone else is also baking something, and the timer belongs to the ionosphere. There's something sweet and mildly absurd in the way radio listeners keep diaries of such things. At 1807, a tone was stronger at 1811, the whistle faded at 1812, a burst of static similar to a cat sitting on aluminum. Somewhere right now, a notebook like that is receiving a careful update, and a cat is considering its options. The masks themselves were the practical sort of strange. Lead is a rather decisive material. It does not put up with nonsense from light, and it shields the face from certain kinds of energetic enthusiasm, which the sky sometimes has. The masks were cut into ovals and filed smooth, the way you smooth the key pointed to keep on your person. Over the eyes, the world became a quiet disk. Why cover the eyes for a listening experiment? People who stare too intently at a dial sometimes forget to hear the tone. People who hear a tone sometimes forget the dial. Lead promises less distraction, a narrowed world, the way an eye doctor's machine clicks smaller and smaller until you are peering down a hallway not much wider than a pencil. It is possible they thought a quieter vision would help them hear a purer signal. It is also possible they just liked the feeling of doing something properly. The best technicians do, and they tend to carry spare fuses for the heart. Capsules are mentioned. This is the part of the story that refuses to settle. Were they for nerves, for clarity, for the gentle bravery of trying something outdoors when the sky is sizing you up? Many people have swallowed stranger things under the supervision of less competent friends. The note's tone is clinical, not mystical. That matters if you're trying to nap, because it means we can avoid the thorns of speculation and instead rest among the soft weeds of procedure. Imagine them checking their watches. One says, "We'll do it at 4:30. The other nods and recalibrates the idea of 4:30 to the Hills version, which runs a few minutes slow when there's fog. Then they observe the local ants, because it is courteous to observe whoever else is using a place. A radio is set on a folded coat. The dial glows slightly. Not much is asked of anyone. If this were a novel, a bird would caw dramatically at this point. Instead, a thrush makes the ordinary sound of a thrush encountering a beetle with a complicated personality. The men place the masks near their knees while they calculate how long the effect might last. This is the kind of calculation nobody prints on a calendar. In the pocket with the note, there was money and a receipt for electronic parts. The receipt has numbers that pretend to be significant, though they only confirm that one of them had been recently economical about resistors. I find it restful when the universe includes receipts. They are proof that even the mysterious keeps business hours. Lightning can throw its opinion into the circuit even when it is far away. That evening, the weather had been doing the thing weather loves best, approaching. To a radio, approaching weather sounds like a handshake in a wool sweater. The men had chased signals before. They knew where to stand to avoid a certain tree's sulky branch that steals bars off a portable set. They had tried different lengths of wire, different orientations, the way cooks try different pans and then use the old one anyway because it knows their stove. A faint station can come roaring in if the ground likes you and the air has its shoulders at the correct angle. This is all very sensible to anyone who has begged a toaster to cooperate. When investigators later looked back over the simple evidence, they found that the men had prepared it as if for work. There were tools, nothing dramatic. A screwdriver with a knurled handle, a pocket knife that had learned a dozen little tricks, a small plastic sleeve that once held a component and now held pocket air. No cups, no vials. The line about capsules remains a polite ghost. We can acknowledge that sentence and let it keep its privacy. After the effect, protect metals. This is the hinged phrase. Radios do not like damp. Their cases feel secure, but water is ambitious. If the men expected to feel unsteady or dazzled or perfectly clear, they still intended to take care of the gear before the sky had the last word. It is a comforting kind of loyalty, and perhaps that is what most of us want our own notes to say. Remember the thing that remembers you. People have proposed many explanations over the years, with the enthusiasm that explanations enjoy, but the setting argues for something narrower. A hill that looks over the city offers a very agreeable horizon. Horizon is the radio listener's word for hope. A high point makes you feel taller than the surrounding noise. The men might have believed, in a quiet, screw-counting way, that if they tuned during the right minutes, an answer would become audible. Or perhaps not an answer, but a tone that proved the question was worth having. This kind of belief was common at the time and is common now. Only today, we disguise it inside phone apps where a small glowing bar goes up and down as if it were tasting the air and forming opinions. Sometimes the phone says there is no service, while the person holding it frowns at the sky as though the sky ought to do better. The appointment on the hill was precise. They had arranged to be there at 16:30, according to the note. People who love radios also love time. Schedules help you pretend you understand the sky's bureaucracy. A quarter past this, a half past that. Imagine them sitting, masks beside them, as the light loses interest in being day. The wind has the personality of a store clerk who is closing in 20 minutes, but is too polite to say so. Perhaps they took the capsules. Perhaps, to their disappointment, nothing much happened. Perhaps the nothing was the point. The way a test often proves that the confounding variable is boredom. There is a graciousness in accepting that a procedure meant to be repeated can also be the thing that ends it. When people went searching later, they found the bodies without a struggle written around them. The hill is very good at looking undisturbed. If you want a place to be undecided, a hill can keep your secret. The reports were tidy because reports prefer tidiness. They are nervous when something won't settle into a category, much like cats faced with cucumbers. The autopsy lines used small words. Some tests came back with an air of either or. Neighbors remembered a light in the sky on a different night, and pressed for detail remembered it less firmly. That is the way with memories that are asked to shine brighter than they are willing. We have no villain. Absence wears a coat and passes for a person only because we nod instead of asking for identification. One tiny irony that likes to sit at the edge of this case is the phrase, protect metals. The radios were not harmed. Metal is stubbornly itself. Heat it and it says, fine, I will be warmer. Wet it and it says, I will dry, possibly at your expense. If you've ever kept a favorite tool in a drawer with a bit of chalk to absorb damp, you understand the note's attitude. The men had an affection for their gear that outlasted the event itself. Imagine them, in their planning stage, not debating metaphysics, but debating the proper wrapping technique for a coil. Brown paper or oilcloth, twine or rubber bands. Rubber bands, someone will say, go brittle when you are not looking, like resolutions. There is a version of this story where everything becomes theatrical. That version looks good in headlines and makes poor bedtime. The quieter version is simply that two men tried to hear a thing at a time they believed was correct with the tools they trusted, and misjudged either the strength of a substance or the weakness of their bodies under that day's weather. They lay down to wait for a signal and did not get up when the signal failed to arrive or arrived on a frequency that has no loudness. That is not a tragedy here, just a very soft ending written in rain. Whenever we pick up a portable set, even a modern one that pretends not to have parts, we are repeating their gesture. We hold the air. We ask the air to answer. Very often it answers with a program about other people holding the air in other places. The loop is rather pleasing. There is a radio tone that fades when clouds are full of opinion. You might have heard it on a camping trip, or through an apartment wall, or from the kitchen when the weather report decides to perform in static. That sound is older than the hill and has a better memory. It keeps everything without deciding what matters. If you're still with me, you're either very curious or very comfortable. Either way works. You can subscribe while the tone in this story hums along under the narrative like a refrigerator, or you can let the hum take you somewhere quieter than subscriptions go. Microfacts rise and drift. Lead is easy to cut if you respect it. Pencil lines are extraordinarily patient. Rain carries just enough salt to make metal interesting. The human ear prefers a narrow band of frequencies, but remains fond of everything it cannot quite place. There is, on amateur radio calendars, a day every year devoted to sitting outdoors and making contact with other people who are also sitting outdoors. Most of the contacts are short and end with polite codes that mean, essentially, thank you for being there. Our two men would have liked that. It is tempting to imagine a moment when they chose the masks. Possibly it happened in a workshop crowded with coils like sleeping snakes. Someone said, if we cover the eyes, we'll hear better. Someone else said, that seems silly, but also sensible. Lead sheets were trimmed, edges filed, interior smoothed with a bit of cloth, so the metal would not scuff the forehead. A practice fit by lamplight. The lamp hums faintly, or perhaps that is your own mind, which hums faintly when it chooses. They would have smiled at their reflections, not because the masks were comical, which they were a little, but because the plan felt complete. People smile when a plan feels complete, even if the plan involves carrying metal ovals up a hill during the wet season to improve the chances of hearing a tone that might not care. The search afterward produced statements that fit neatly in columns. A constable noted the time. A medic noted the weather. An acquaintance mentioned that one of the men had been optimistic about an experiment, in the way some people are optimistic about the proper arrangement of cutlery. The papers took turns offering explanations. Most explanations were decorated like shop windows. They drew the eye. They did not sell much. Meanwhile, the hill owned the only thing that mattered, the silence of the place where the grass had been pressed down. For a while, it remembered the shape of a shoulder. Then it decided not to. At the end of many such stories, a conclusion is manufactured and presented with a bow. Tonight we decline the bow. The frequency that remains is just barely audible, like a neighbor in their kitchen trying to decide between tea and something louder. The masks were bagged and labeled. The note was copied and placed in a file. The radios, if they survived, were probably sold or shelved or slowly reconfigured into other projects, the way cities reconfigure themselves without asking. Somewhere a drawer still holds the screwdriver with the knurled handle. Somewhere a receipt sleeps behind other receipts, pleased with its arithmetic. A hill continues to be a hill, which is a respectable career. If you hold your breath, you can almost feel the air tuning itself around you. A car passing outside your window stretches and compresses the sound of its engine in the oldest demonstration of physics that will visit your street tonight. If you walk to a park now with a small radio and turn the dial very slowly, you would hear entire nations decide what to talk about at this hour, and also a great deal of air telling you anything it can think of. You might tuck a coin into the battery cover because some radios seem to behave better with a small promise of currency. You might set your phone face down so the sky will not have to compete. You might, without meaning to, close your eyes. That would be an understandable experiment. The men on Vintem Hill had a meeting scheduled, and the guest may have been only the patient hum of the world. That is a more common visitor than we admit, and a sufficient one. Radios are at their most human when they fail to find anything worth broadcasting and instead make the ashes of electricity sing. If you listen for long enough, the static arranges itself into opinions that you can respect. It says, "The day is almost done, please wash your hands, the weather prefers." You and you're wrapped in a blanket, someone is speaking far away about a topic that mattered to them and will arrive here trimmed down to a rumor, and everything else is resting. The sky, like a courteous host, will walk you to the door and wait while you fumble with the keys. Somewhere, a pencil groove in an old notepad page is still a little ridge you could run your nail along if you found it. Somewhere a strip of lead is sleeping very soundly, having done its job. The hill is there when you want to try again, which you do not, but it enjoys being available. We listen at dusk, rain, static, and a tone just out of reach. And then the tone becomes whatever you need it to be, including silence, including the small breath you take before sleep, including the sentence trailing away like a carrier wave that has judged correctly that you are already tuned to a gentler frequency. You might not think anyone would argue about the proper shape of a cloud, but in the late 19th century, several very polite people spent years doing nothing else, and somehow this felt urgent enough to publish. Their solution was a book with a name that sounds like a weather magician's diary, the International Cloud Atlas. It was not a novel. It contained no plot, only descriptions, sketches, and a soothing insistence that the sky could be alphabetized. The book arrived in 1896, carrying the particular aroma of new ink and slightly damp linen paper, the kind that makes a desk feel important. It proposed that someone somewhere should look up, point, and say a Latin word without panicking. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe for more gentle classifications. Then again, if the next paragraph becomes a harmless gray blanket, you have my permission to drift underneath it and forget to press any buttons at all. The atlas was the child of meteorologists who liked comparing notes, but disliked the notes being different sizes. One observer would write alta cumulus, perhaps with stratiform tendency, while another would say middle heaps with a mind to become a sheet, which is poetic but not handy. Ships needed a common tongue. So did little town observatories with brass instruments that made everyone stand straighter. The committee met in rooms where barometers rested like dignified pets, and where a pointer might say, with care, that a photograph captured zero stratus, then tilt the card as if adjusting the weather by hand. Photographs of clouds look very similar until you decide they don't. They solved this problem by maiming what the edges did. If the edge was fibrous, fibrous Latin appeared. If it was lumpish, lumpish Latin marched in. The sky did not object, or if it did, nobody heard over the comfortable scrape of chairs on parquet floors. The atlas did not just categorize clouds. It choreographed observers. The instructions described where to stand, how to write the time, how to translate the sky into lines that would look serious in Geneva. A proper observer noted wind, temperature, and the mood of the horizon, translated as visibility. One measured cloud motion by imagining a chosen puff pinned to a glass plate held at arm's length, then counting how many degrees it wandered in 60 seconds. This method rewards patience and triceps. At sea, the process grew livelier. Sailors drew tiny arrows on gridded forms, while the deck confided that it might become a floor or a wall at any moment. The forms insisted on elegance despite these jokes. You could almost hear paper clips breeding in the margins. Somewhere in a coastal office, a clerk alphabetized the storms and wrote a very firm letter to a cyclone in the Indian Ocean explaining that counterclockwise is not a suggestion. To make this coordinating possible, the atlas offered pictures. They were meant to be universal. A cumulus looked like a slightly puzzled sheep. A cumulonimbus looked like a very confident cauliflower. Cirrus resembled hair combed by a distracted giant. The captions were gentle, sometimes apologetic. Fig, 31, a cloud with the aspect of a shower, as though to admit that the aspect might be misleading, and no one would take it personally. The drawings were based on photographs, which were based on the idea that a camera could hold still longer than a cloud could misbehave. Early plates were printed by collotype, a process that sounds like a party game and requires gelatin doing things nobody expects from dessert. A plate might receive a fixative and then a blessing in either order. Somewhere, a technician developed stains of sky on his cuffs, and couldn't he persuade anyone that the stains were important? You would expect the atlas to declare victory and move on, but like many tidy books, it grew crusts of correspondence. Observers wrote to the committee about clouds that refused to fit. One described a formation like fish scales. Another mentioned a sky that behaved as if it had overslept. Mackerel sky had been a sailor's phrase, chatty and useful, and the atlas wanted such phrases, but also wanted them washed, brushed, and provided with a Latin middle name. So Cirrocumulus undulatus entered the room looking extremely well-mannered. An agricultural society in France suggested a variant for haymaking days when the clouds seemed to reassure the laborers that no one would be rained on before supper. This suggestion did not become official, though it lingers in the minutes like a kindly ghost offering sandwiches. People sometimes think the sky is democratic, but in the 1890s it developed its own bureaucracy. National weather services sent emissaries to congresses with titles that could tire a headline. They carried brass compasses in leather cases and more expressions of institutional optimism, by which I mean they believed that if a cloud had a proper label, it would behave. The atlas became scripture of a very practical religion. Devotees performed small devotions at noon. A reading of the thermometer, a glance at the barometer, a note about the quality of shade under a tree. They compared results by telegraph, which is a sort of long metal string that asks far-off rooms to agree. The telegraph, when weather people used it, grew a surprising sense of humor, sometimes adding an extra squiggle that transformed Cirrus Stratus into circus, a forecast everyone welcomed. The atlas also needed colors. Artists were instructed to tint cloud plates lightly, so observers could compare morning blue to evening blue without wandering into poetry. The chosen palette becomes sleepy just to read. Cobalt diluted, a wash of Payne's gray, a whisper of Naples yellow at the lower edge, where horizon pretends to become a soup. The result looked like someone tried to paint silence and then labeled it with numbers. A plate would say, no, 8 Stratus. A student would say, gray. The student was not wrong. Stratus is the cloud that believes in office hours and flourishes in towns with tram schedules. It lies down across whole countries and refuses to be cinematic. The atlas loves Stratus because it was dependable and therefore measurable. There is a secret comfort in dull things that show up on time. By now our story has wandered into the second scene, though you hardly notice because that is how clouds do it. Observers learned to treat weather not as a mood, but as a method. A rainy day did not mean sad. It meant nimbus stratus with precipitation continuous, which is exactly as emotional as a well-filed tax receipt. Ships compiled logs with little sky icons. The icons were small, the seas were large, and somewhere a mate became famous on his vessel for drawing the best tiny shower. Sailors used the atlas to predict winds for canvas and later for coal schedules. A well-named cloud could nudge a captain into arriving with a smug face and dry tea. The Royal Navy adopted the classifications with the earnest joy of an organization that had recently adopted many other classifications and found, to its relief, that the sky did not complain as loudly as sailors did when inspected. Even the lighting of observation stations needed uniformity. Some rooms faced west, others faced budget. The instructions said, Record from the open air when possible. When not possible, record from a window, but please mention the glass. One cannot overstate how much 19th century science thrived on asking grown men to report the presence of a window. A Danish station added a note that their window rattled in easterlies and thus somewhat soured the observer's mood. This addendum did not improve the data, but delighted everyone who read it. The atlas did not instruct on feelings. It assumed feelings would sit quietly in the hall until the cloud count was finished. Clouds, being old, ignored every committee, yet the atlas eventually taught people to see them in unison. There is a kindness in being told what a thing is called. It frees you to notice other things about it. Children learn the words and use them as spells. Cumulus for picnics, cirrus for long thoughts, cumulonimbus for the theatrical exit of a sports day. Weather offices sent forecasts by postcard, a habit so charming it ought to be reinstated for naps. Postcards explained that a line of cirrus stratus meant the arrival of rain tomorrow, which meant you could fix your fence today with the certain pleasure of being clever in advance. Nothing in the atlas promised control, only companionship with the sky's habits, which is perhaps even better. The third scene begins when photographers decide the book can be improved by more pictures and fewer adjectives. Cameras had grown lighter and more willing to be carried to roofs. Lenses stared upward like bored astronomers. The problem with photographing clouds is not taking the picture. It is admitting that an hour later the same place will hold new ones and you might prefer those. So archives began to grow like veteran hedges. Some were cataloged according to the Beaufort scale of wind, as if the sky would someday ask to see its personnel file. Plate 402, Cirrus and Tortoise, wind 4, barometer steady, a sentence the sky cannot read but would probably correct if it could. A few early photographs show a lamppost intruding into the bottom corner, as if the town insisted on a cameo. Editors scratched the lamppost out and told the town to mind its footing. Along the equator, observers noticed things the atlas had not seen from Europe. Thunderheads rose like monuments. Anvils drifted with a confidence that made adjectives give up. The committee listened, frowned politely, and added varieties as if seating late guests at a long table. It was agreed that local vocabulary would be noted in italics, a typographic form that suggests a whisper from a different climate. The atlas, like any empire of labels, expanded without moving much. In Australia, a sheep station reported, "Morning glory, roll clouds that stretched like ribbons." The names stayed colloquial, but the photographs joined the collection and sat quietly, behaving, which is what photographs do as soon as you close the album. The microfacts that might keep you just awake enough to drift correctly become very small at this point. For instance, an Italian astronomer measured the average width of a cirrus filament as seen at arm's length and compared it to a strand of angel hair pasta, concluding unhelpfully that the sky was overcooked. A Swiss school produced an embroidered set of cloud forms for children, turning meteorology into patient thread. In Boston, a librarian refused to shelve the atlas among geography books and put it with dictionaries, where it made etymologists stare out the window and forget the alphabet for several minutes. None of this changed the weather. All of it changed the weather's manners. The fourth and final drift of our episode is quiet. Once the names existed, people noticed that clouds sometimes wore them like hats and sometimes like jokes. Weather forecasters, armed with the atlas, could write sentences that made railway companies drowsily happy. Farmers pretended not to care and then harvested early. Painters began to sign their skies more confidently, especially those who had always enjoyed getting the bruised purples correct just before rain began. A few municipalities, encouraged by the new vocabulary, passed ordinances about smoke because they disliked watching a coal plume try to impersonate a cumulonimbus. The atlas did not plan to become environmental policy. It merely threatened smog with literacy. There is also the small matter of the 10th cloud. For a long time, the list felt complete at 9 principal forms because 9 has a classical neatness. Then someone argued for altocumulus lenticularis, the strange lens-shaped clouds that park above mountains like UFOs with good posture. They looked engineered. They were simply polite about wind. Many photographs reached the committee, and the committee sighed, sharpened its Latin, and made room. The sky did not register the vote, but mountaineers learned to point and say the phrase and feel as though they had packed the right word for the trail. Years later, new forms joined. Human beings, it turned out, could keep naming the same old vapor and still smile. Today, the atlas lives online, where clouds forget to log in. But the old printed volumes endure in long drawers that slide like obedient clouds themselves. The paper has softened at the edges, which makes it excellent for bedtime. If you found one and opened to a plate at random, you could follow the caption into the day that supported it. Cumulus humulus fair weather heaps, a description that is secretly a lullaby. If you stood at a window and looked up, you would be performing exactly the gesture prescribed in 1896, which is both efficient and reassuring. Observe, record, breathe, and if nothing unusual happens, be pleased. The atlas never solved weather. It solved conversation about weather, and that is the greater accomplishment. On railway platforms and in farm kitchens, the words became compact tools for pointing at the same sky with the same sentence. Cirrus building, someone says. Possibly rain tomorrow, someone answers, thoughtfully locating a coat hook. These are not dramatic exchanges, which makes them perfect. The brain likes a small puzzle, label, implication, minor act, repeat. It is a humane rhythm, the very one you feel now as the room grows a little dim and your breathing standardizes into a domestic forecast calm, with occasional deeper gusts, visibility moderate under a comfortable blanket. If you remain awake, you might wonder what cloud you are under right this moment. Through the window, there could be a flat gray ceiling with no ambition. That would be stratus, and it means that your plans are safe, mostly because they were small to begin with. Or the sky might carry pages of cirrostratus like onion skin, which means, according to the book and to a million afternoons, that a front is somewhere rehearsing its entrance. You don't have to do anything about this information except enjoy having it. It's like being told that the library will still be there tomorrow, which libraries somehow always are, even when nothing else behaves. The atlas made the world agree on trivial matters so that more serious matters would be bearable. You cannot stop a storm by naming it Cirrocumulus stratiformis. You can, however, place the word on your tongue and notice you feel less alone beneath the entire moving roof of Earth. The book taught us that craftsmanship can be aimed at the sky and still come back useful. There is a special kind of happiness in learning a term that will never impress a party, but will always instruct your eyes. It is the happiness of sharpening a pencil no one else was going to use, or polishing a doorknob because you respect doors. So we leave the committee still in session in a room where the minutes smell faintly of glue. A clerk stamps a diagram with an ink pad that has opinions about dryness. Somewhere a sailor fills a little square on a log with a careful drawing of a shower that looks like a rake tipped upside down. A schoolchild labels a blue crayon Cumulus Day. The rest of us step outside for a moment and feel the sky resting its enormous, unhurried hand on our heads. The words are there when we want them: cirrus, stratus, cumulus, like soft switches that dim the day until it is exactly the brightness you can sleep in. And if the sky forgets its part and puts on something unlisted, we will open the atlas and smile anyway, because the point was never certainty. It was the comfort of looking together and calling the same soft Latin name before quietly doing nothing about it at all. You might not expect a rectangle to have a favorite square root, but the pieces of paper on most desks secretly worship square root too. It is the quiet hero of series paper. The reason a 4 folds into a 5 without changing shape. The reason photocopiers hum like contented bees when you press scale to 71%. This is not a thriller. It is a long, calm story about rectangles trying very hard to look like themselves in every size. If that sounds soothing, you're exactly the audience the standard was written for. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe or not. I'll be over here gently measuring margins with a ruler made to the millimeter, which is the sort of activity that makes time pass in comfortable, evenly spaced clicks. The idea begins in the 18th century with mathematicians who had tidy desks and opinions about efficiency. They noticed that most rectangles behave awkwardly when halved. A slice produces a new shape that looks like it owes family resemblance money, but a rectangle whose sides are in the ratio 1:2 reproduces itself upon folding. The long side becomes the short side. The short side becomes helpfully shorter. You can keep doing this like a magician who only knows one trick and is adored for it. In the early 19th century, the German savant Georg Christoph Lichtenberg proposed exploiting this ratio for paper sizes. His notes read like somebody whispering to stationery. He didn't live to see the idea standardized. That honor waited for a century when committees acquired a taste for gentle perfection. By 1922, in Berlin, the German standards body DIN published DIN 476, a document with the personality of a well-made drawer. It decreed that AO would have an area of exactly 1 square meter, which is a big sheet capable of hosting a small meeting. Have it along the long side and you get a 1. Have again for a 2, and so on until you reach a 10, which is the size of a decisive postage stamp. A 4, the celebrity of a family, measures 210 by 297 millimeters. Numbers that look arbitrary until you remember the square root thing and nod like a member of a small, satisfied cult. The family extends sideways with B sizes for posters and C sizes for envelopes, because even envelopes enjoy a standard that allows them to hold folded things without resentment. The entire system is so consistent that it almost purrs. Craft paper, once a chaotic field of personal convictions, lined up obediently inside the A world and found purpose. Printers and typists embraced a 4 because it solved an awkward office tango. You could type a report on a 4, fold it into a 5 for a booklet, or expand it to a 3 for the version you pretend to read in meetings. There were, of course, holdouts. Across the Atlantic, paper sizes chose a different destiny. Letter stood at 8.5 by 11 inches, a rectangle of pleasant personality but irregular genealogy. Its cousin, legal, added 3 more inches as if it had opinions. People argue about the origin of these sizes the way cats argue about ownership of sunbeams earnestly, without resolution. One theory involves the reach of early papermakers' frames. Another proposes a rule of convenience, something that fits in a file drawer with room for regret. The result is that American 3-hole punches make a rhythm the A-series never learns, and binders behave like dialects. Even so, the square root rectangle remained patient. It spread gently through Europe, across Asia, and into the cabinets of anyone who wanted a stack of paper to look like a set of Russian dolls that all agree about geometry. Now the story slows to the tempo of a ream just opened. A ream is 500 sheets, which sounds like a lot until you print a student handout and discover it as 4 lessons and a sigh. Most office paper weighs 80 grams per square meter, a measurement that looks very precise because it is. The weight tells you how the sheet will feel when you flick it with a finger and whether a folder will forgive it. A lighter 70-gram sheet rustles like a polite whisper. A heavier 100-gram sheet behaves with a dignity bordering on smug. Mill's cut parent rolls into cut-sized packs. Each pack wears a plastic wrapper that acts like a raincoat and a promise. Inside, moisture matters. Paper likes relative humidity around 50%, which is the same range preferred by museums, librarians, and houseplants with boundless self-esteem. Too dry, and the sheets curl like cats. Too wet, and they stick like siblings in a family portrait. The grain of paper runs in a direction, the way wood does, although the grain is invisible until you try to fold it the wrong way and it responds with a papery mutter. Bookbinders respect grain the way sailors respect wind. Print shops will ask whether you want long grain or short grain, as if you were ordering pasta. Copier trays are adjusted to keep the curl facing down, noses to the paper wind. Some printers place tiny arrows on the wrapper to indicate the recommended feed, a courtesy that turns out to be the difference between a stack that behaves and a stack that acts like QVD in training. These details do not disturb the S-series ratio. They merely ensure it keeps its composure during a busy day of being rectangles. Margins, too, acquired a routine. On a 4, the ordinary 2-centimeter margin pleases typographers because it leaves a text block that looks calm and mellow, with room for a staple to live its best life at the top left. Staplers, by the way, are almost always angled around 45 degrees, not because of drama, but because sheets turn more politely in ring binders when the corner is pinned diagonally. A 4 invites such small courtesies. Hole punches use 2 holes in much of Europe, 3 holes in some offices, and 4 holes when someone bought a very serious binder. The holes align with filing cabinets designed as hospitality suites for paper, cool, dark, and smelling faintly of stationery. The cabinets speak the language of S-sizes fluently. They accommodate a 4 hanging folders with the space of a polite handshake. Our second drift arrives quietly, like an A4 sheet sliding into a C4 envelope without folding. As DIN 476 matured, other nations adopted the logic. Japan introduced USB series dimensions that sit companionably between A sizes, especially pleasing for posters that must look important without bullying walls. France, fond of its own history, adapted the standard with an elegance that suggests a shrug and perfect tailoring. Britain embraced A sizes with the resigned joy of someone discovering a bus route that always arrives. Stationers redesigned their shelves to display reams like bricks of compressed snowfall. Architects standardized drawing sheets. Schools standardized exercise books. Governments standardized forms until citizens developed the reflex of writing their names in the top right box without thinking. The standard had a way of infiltrating rituals. Fold in a 4 1/3 to make a business letter that fits a DL envelope, a size that stands for dimension lengthwise, but could stand equally for Don Lament it fits. Trifolds became origami for clerks. Print shops learned to impose 85 pages on a 3-sheet for booklets, so that the page numbers fall into place like shy acrobats. Photocopiers learned to sense the presence of A-sizes the way cats sense the presence of a newly unfolded blanket. Reduced to 71% to copy a 3 onto a 4. Reduced to 50% to place an A4 on a 6. Enlarged to 200% to double any size, which is less a feature than an act of friendship between machine and rectangle. Manuals list these percentages in tiny tables, but the hands learn them and press the buttons without consulting the text, the way a baker knows when dough is ready by listening to its quiet happiness. There were tangents, all gentle. Map makers liked a 2 and a 1 because a town looks more confident when spread across a table like a picnic. Photographers enjoyed a 3+, that mischievous size slightly bigger than a 3 to allow full bleed prints and the trimming of ambitions. Engineers flirted with oversized formats to show off networks of pipes that fit in real life, under floors, and behind walls where no one will see their perfect right angles. The beauty of the E-system is not just that each size talks to the next, but that each size fits available furniture. A 3 fits drafting boards, a 4 fits clipboards, a 5 fits bedside tables where to-do lists practice deep relaxation. The standard did not stop at paper. Envelopes followed with their own ISO 269 logic, specifically the C-series that welcomes sheets with a firmness that says, I have you. C4 carries an unfolded A4. C5 carries an A5 or a folded A4. C6 carries an A6 or a twice folded A4, which is the sort of arithmetic that makes dinner parties proud when explained on napkins. There's also the B series of envelopes, larger than A and smaller than C, designed for people who distrust tight fits. Filing boxes scaled accordingly. Label makers discovered the pleasure of printing A4 and meaning it. A4 went from being a dimension to being a personality trait. Sensible, portable, not given to dramatic speeches. The third scene begins with a computer pretending to forget paper exists. In early word processors, page sizes defaulted to something that made printers negotiate. Eventually, software settled down. In most of the world, the default is A4. In other places, it is letter, which means international offices exchange documents that arrive feeling slightly underdressed or slightly overdressed, like guests who misunderstood the invitation. The difference is small letter is a bit wider and a bit shorter, but enough to produce margins that make fonts look like they are sitting on the edge of a chair, uncertain. PDFs try to be bilingual. Print dialogues offer fit to printable area, a diplomatic phrase that translates as, "We will make your page arrange itself, please don't worry," followed by a comfortable scaling percentage that sends the square root 2 rectangle into its satisfying spiral of self-similarity. Printers have trays labeled A3 and A4, sometimes with little pictograms of rectangles that appear to be smiling. The machines know about duplex printing, the art of putting words on both sides without confusing the page numbers. A skill that seems magical until you see the paper path diagram with arrows where gears think in millimeters. Paper exits and re-enters like a commuter who forgot their umbrella. Many printers add tiny graduation marks to show you where to load B5 or other delightful rarities. There's a quiet joy in moving the tray guide just so and hearing it click into a new standard, like adjusting a bell to single notch after lunch. Designers who spend their days persuading rectangles to make eye contact with other rectangles enjoy the A series because it stacks into grids that behave. A 4 divided into halves, thirds, or quarters yields proportions that forgive mistakes. Posters at A2 can host typet sizes that make sense broadly. 7.2 PT looks loud but not rude. 3.6 PT behaves like a patient teacher. 1.0 PT knows when to mind its business. The A series even influences how we see photographs in frames. A format known as a 4+ exists with an extra margin, so pictures can be cropped without harming composition. These are the kind of solutions that make you yawn in approval. Stationers, meanwhile, keep the pastoral economy of paper alive. They sell F4 pads with perforations that tear like well-timed jokes, and A5 notebooks with elastic bands that make every list feel like an oath. There are A7 reporters pads for pockets, where shorthand lives like a small bird. There are 3 sketchbooks whose pages are so wide you feel briefly athletic simply opening them. Each item advertises its size as if wearing a badge at a conference. Hello, I am A5. We probably met at the envelope kiosk. People pick them up and test the covers for floppiness, which is a quality best graded by hand and never written on packaging. The fourth and final drift is a long exhale. The A-series standard keeps doing its work quietly while digital life practices being paperless with intermittent success. We read on screens cut to 16:9 or 3:2, ratios chosen by entirely different committees. Yet when it is time to sign, to mail, to pin on a corkboard, the body remembers the comfort of A4. A sheet folds once, twice, perhaps thrice, and becomes the weight and size of a pocket thought. Every school child learns the ritual of fold your A4 into 4 to make a card, and discovers the miracle of the self-similar rectangle, a geometry trick disguised as craft. Meeting rooms continue to set out A4 pads next to glasses of water, as if pens might still do something decisive. Sometimes a designer proposes a new exotic proportion. It is admired, then quietly measured against the square root 2 rectangle and found excitable. The standard endures because asks so little and returns so much. Printers can tell a sheet where to stand without raising their voices. Paper mills can cut with almost no waste, the large rectangles dividing into smaller ones, like a family that inherited a knack for peaceful holidays. Envelope makers know what guests to expect. Shelves in shops are built to a choreography that prevents customer elbows. Even the humble clipboard is content. It knows it will not be asked to accommodate a surprise. There is, buried inside the standard, a bedtime story about numbers. If you take any A size and keep halving, the area drops by half each time, but the proportions remain loyal. It is a little like time in the evening. You fold the day into a smaller and smaller space dinner. Washing up, a chapter, and the shape of your life remains recognizable. The 2 ratio is not magic, just gentle. A 0, 1 square meter. A 1, half. A 2, a quarter. A 3, an eighth. A 4, a 16th fractions that want you to think of cake without getting up. If you were to lay out the entire series side by side from an A0 to a 10, you would see a procession of rectangles that all maintain eye contact with each other, like cousins at a reunion wearing the same quiet smile. Occasionally, a museum displays one of the original Din pamphlets, and visitors read it the way people read recipes, not for suspense, but for reassurance. The diagrams show a long diagonal and a few numbers held with the kind of confidence that comes from millimeters. There's no hero, no twist, no moral, only a method that works whether the weather is dry or damp. That in itself can be heroic after a day full of screens negotiating with other screens. You pick up a piece of A4 and it behaves. You fold it and it becomes the right thing again. The world briefly aligns to the idea that form might follow kindness. If you're still with me, perhaps your breathing has joined the rhythm of the ream. Inhale 500 sheets, exhale 1 by 1. You can imagine the weight of an O in your arms, like carrying a very large promise, and the weight of a 10 on your fingertip, which is more like a polite suggestion. Somewhere a printer powers down. The rollers decide to rest. A box of C5 envelopes leans slightly, full but not anxious. A stapler clicks once as if to say goodnight, and the rectangles wait, stacked in their perfect family tree, ready to become letters, lists, schedules, maps, menus, and, most importantly, nothing at all, just blank self-similar space, scaled to the evening shaped for sleep. You might not expect the number on a front door to have a biography, but street numbers do, and some of them are older than the doors they guard. The odd thing is not that houses have numbers. It's that whole cities agreed, one by one, to count in a calmly organized way, so the mail could find the soup while it was still warm. The earliest attempts at numbering looked like someone was trying to inventory a parade. Vienna in the 1770s painted conscription numbers on buildings, marching up and down alleys in an order that made sense mostly to the clerk who carried the brush. Paris went through several flavors of arithmetic before settling on the simple habit of putting evens on one side and odds on the other, like socks finally pairing up. If you're still awake by the time we reach the drama of the hyphen in 23 to 29, feel free to subscribe or don't. House numbers are patient people. They will be here when you come back. Once a city decides to number its houses, a quiet choreography begins. Surveyors unroll chains that clink like a bag of teaspoons. A decree is written. A man who owns a paint shop looks suddenly prosperous. The earliest systems often began at a city gate because that was where days began for carts and gossip. You entered and the numbers followed you as if counting your footsteps. When another gate claimed to be more important, a second sequence started, so streets carried two opinions at once. Then the even-odd compromise arrived. Start from a river or a main square. Let numbers rise as they leave the center, and keep evens on the right hand as you walk away. This rule is lovely because it carries a hidden mnemonic from the days when streets were not lit. The even side and the odd side can be described to a stranger without pointing, which kept a courteous distance that polite people appreciated even before the invention of umbrellas. Every numbering decision is a miniature philosophy. Consecutive numbering 1, 2, 3, 4 makes deliveries feel like counting sheep. Metric numbering assigns an address based on distance from the origin, one number every few meters, with decimals doing the whispering. This is useful on long rural roads where houses appear like timid punctuation. The metric style means you can guess how far number 1240 is from 0, which turns a drive into slow arithmetic soothing for the navigator, and surprisingly honest when you claim you are 200 numbers away. Some towns use block numbers, where 300s mean the third block, an approach favored by fire departments because smoke respects integers. A few places awarded letters as if houses were exam papers, 12A, 12B, 12C. That system ages into 12F and 12G and sometimes 12Z, at which point neighbors form a committee and declare victory by renumbering everything again, a civic ritual that appears in old council minutes like a sigh. House numbers quickly learned to sit on enamel plates, and those plates acquired personalities. In the 19th century, Paris adopted deep blue signs with white numbers that look like they've just been polished with a handkerchief. Berlin experimented with porcelain ovals that could survive both weather and opinions. London started with painted numerals and then, in a burst of affluence, installed cast metal digits that could be detected by candlelight from a rattling carriage. In some quarters of Istanbul, numbers sprouted on small ceramic tiles that resembled biscuits. Over time, the digits themselves took on typography as a form of local accent. A curvy 2 in Lisbon leans slightly, as if balancing a sardine tin. A stern 7 in Prague settles on its serif like a cat. Municipalities issued guidelines. Numerals must be at least so many centimeters tall. They must be legible from so many paces. They must not hide behind ivy, laundry, or poetic license. People complied, mostly, and when they didn't, the postman developed a sixth sense that allowed him to locate No 18 by the smell of lunchtime soup at precisely the right window. Early postal systems treated numbering as a promise. The Universal Postal Union, formed in 1874, did not tell cities how to count, but it did expect that counting would happen. A letter could travel from Buenos Aires to Budapest without learning a second language if addresses behaved politely. That politeness extended to the smallest marks. The hyphen in 23 to 29 indicates a building spanning 2 lots. The slash in 14 halves hints at a courtyard. The mysterious bis in some places means, and also again, like the encore at a concert no one wishes to leave. In Manhattan, the cross-street shorthand of West 73rd off Columbus became a detective tool. In rural counties in the United States, 911 addressing redefined thousands of routes into regularized roads so emergency services could navigate nights that would not invite hesitation. People woke up to find themselves now living at 421 Meadowlark Lane instead of the white farmhouse beyond. Miller's Creek, which is poetic but not helpful to an ambulance. Renumbering days are their own weather. Notices go up. Newspapers print maps. A small office is formed, the Renumbering Bureau, usually 2 people in a coffee pot. Volunteers weave up and down streets, trading old numbers for new, like cake servers making triangular decisions. Businesses receive boxes of replacement letterhead and a sense of déjà vu. At first there is grumbling, then a brief thrill. Their building is now 200, which sounds like a place with reception. The city updates its directories. The libraries update their card catalogs. The card catalog drawers sigh and accept fresh labels, which is what they were born to do. There are photographs of men on ladders screwing new plates into brick at a height precisely decided by regulation. high enough to be seen above a parked carriage, later a parked car, later an adventurous shrub. As for the old numbers, some become paperweights. Others are hung in kitchens like retired jersey numbers, celebrated for years of service. The quiet complexity shows up in corner cases that make historians happy and clerks persistent. Terraced houses built as a single estate might run 1 to 40, then begin again on the next street, 41 to 80, because the developer thought in parcels instead of roads. In Venice, where streets sometimes stop because the water finally says, "My turn," addresses run within Sestieri districts, so a number may describe a building in a neighborhood rather than a point on a line. In Japan, blocks are numbered before houses, which turns wandering into a treasure hunt where the prize is a neatly wrapped package and a bell. This is less confusing than it sounds. The logic is that communities grow like coral, incrementally in clusters. Postal workers form mental maps, not unlike gardeners, remembering which plants prefer shade. Deliveries succeed because familiarity outpaces geometry. On country roads, addresses once arrived by story. You would drive to the second bend after the big elm and look for the house with the bright blue barrel under the gutter. Then the elm fell, and the barrel was painted a modest gray, and the story lost a chapter. What replaced it was the E911 grid, which assigned numbers by distance so that the fire truck could read the road like a thermometer. The house at 6,420 is 6.420 kilometers from the baseline. Its neighbor 6,438 is 18 meters farther. There's nothing sentimental about this, and that is its kindness. For the first months after such a change, relatives write the old description in the corner of envelopes because memory has a longer tail than policy. Then they stop and the letter arrives anyway, and the kettle boils on schedule. Even within a building, numbers have adventures. Apartment 5A implies an "a through whatever" on each floor, but occasionally a floor plan shrugs and becomes creative. Some buildings skip 13, an old superstition that allowed developers to sell the next level as 14, with a wink everyone understood. In certain cities, ground floors are called 0, which is elegant and confusing at precisely the same speed. Elevators wrestle with this and adopt buttons that require almost no courage. Residents adapt faster. Sub-basements get friendly minus signs. The basement itself yields lettered storage cages where long-forgotten suitcases live like retired stage props. All of this sits behind a single street number that faces the weather and answers for the rest. Signs age, paint fades, enamel chips into charming commas. Municipal crews carry small ladders on vans and spend days replacing numerals while swapping rumors about football. Some owners add illumination, a little soft window of light behind the digits that makes the address glow like a sensible idea. Others commission brass. Brass digits age into the color of tea, a tone that suggests the house keeps good company with autumn. In lanes where numbers once faced, the cart track owners sometimes reverse the digits to meet the new path that car tires preferred, and this is how you see a 32 affixed to the garden gate rather than the front door. Mail carriers do not mind. They memorize the dog before they memorize the number. The more you look, the more each address reveals a layered time. Consider the hyphenated ranges 23 to 29 above a shared door. They tell you that once this was 5 houses, then someone combined them to make a bakery with ambitions. Or the suffix 1/2, as in 14 and a half, a storybook cottage tucked behind a main house, installed when land was gracelessly divided by need and hope. In American college towns, the 1/2 addresses are often rented by people who play the flute. In some German towns, a tiny A or B appears after the numeral when a lot is split. In Poland, AIM appears for Myskani, the apartment, and you can imagine a clerk with a neat pencil making a list so consistent it hums. Emergency services, which must discover you at speed, audit the night. They ask that the number be visible from the road in contrast with the wall. Reflective digits are admired. Driveway markers stand at attention like slim soldiers with the address marching vertically. Snowplows learn not to clip them. Rural mailboxes adopt large numerals on both sides because letters in snow share a love of drifting. Where language is read right to left, numerals still read left to right because numbers keep their own grammar. Another small treaty in the history of agreement that addresses embody. There is a gentle comedy in the way navigation apps have relearned what door plates knew. GPS locates a parcel in latitude and longitude perfect, down to a few meters, persuasive enough to send you to the back alley instead of the front step. Delivery drivers develop an instinct for rotating the little blue dot so that house numbers come into view like polite faces. Companies experiment with 3-word coordinates to describe squares on the earth. Lamp, post, porridge, and some people enjoy sending their location as a haiku of nouns. Yet when you tell a taxi number 48 on the even side after the pharmacy, the driver nods, because odd and even were the first teachers, and they were good at their job. There are micro-histories worth tucking under the pillow. Italian towns once painted numbers directly on stucco and black Roman numerals, which looked dignified until weather revised their arithmetic. In Madrid, tiles hand-painted with cobalt script announce Calle de la Paz, 19 inches, and you can hear the ceramic clink when the street wakes early. In Victorian Britain, street names were sometimes mounted high on buildings at junctions because lamplighters wanted to admire them from ladders. In North America, some neighborhoods use hundreds blocks, so that if a shop lives at 734, you know it resides between 7th and 8th. Shopkeepers appreciate how easily tourists can search with their feet. Every method is a different lullaby with the same refrain. Please arrive without wandering too long. Even in the quietest cul-de-sac, there is the possibility of extension. Planners leave numbers unused at the end of a row like chairs for guests. When a new house appears, it slides into 21A or 23B, and the sequence stretches without breaking. The alternative renumbering everyone makes headlines only in small type and keeps clerks engaged for months. The people who most object are those whose address contained a lucky coincidence birthday digits, a pleasing palindrome, the year of a famous match. They keep the old brass numerals in a drawer and sometimes melt them to a shed, where they live on as part of a private folklore. The standard of odd and even brings with it a small moral. It is easier to find your way when a city has silently agreed on the order of things. Standing at the lower end of a street, you can tell which way numbers grow, and there is a comfort in marching toward increase. In some places, they restart at rivers. In others, they carry through, and a road can travel 10,000 numbers without a gasp. Long avenues accept their fate and carry identities like telephone area codes. People write, "I live in the 8,000s," as if it were a season of life. As night comes, house numbers do what they do best: wait and point. The enamel cools. Brass becomes moonlit tea. Delivery vans hush into electric purrs and read addresses with cameras that nod. A milk crate sits beneath 12B. The bottle inside has a cap that resembles a coin and a tiny island of cream that forms a map if you wet it. On the odd side of the street, a cat rehearses ownership of steps. Number 11 tonight, 13 tomorrow. Not because of superstition, but because the stone is warmer there. Somewhere a committee discusses whether the cul-de-sac at the edge of town should be called a close or away, and they consult a book thicker than necessary to ensure the new numbers fall properly between the old ones. The book agrees. The town breathes out. If you are still awake, imagine the city as a ledger that writes itself in neat, unwavering columns. Street names across the top, numbers marching down, each digit a promise of where the kettle lives. Behind every plate, there are people engaged in their particular small infinities, socks on radiators, lemon trees in pots, a bicycle leaning politely. The number asks nothing heroic. It only says quietly, here. And in a world where many things move faster than you can blink, a door plate that keeps saying, here is a good companion for sleep. You might not expect a scrap of stationery to sound like a radio, but some notes do that if you read them slowly enough. A line about capsules, a reminder to protect metals, a time like 1630 that wears its call on with quiet authority. These are frequencies you can tune by eye. Imagine late light and wet grass, the kind that sticks to your socks and volunteers to come home with you. The path up Vintem Hill is narrow and obliging, always a little damp, as if the hill keeps last week's weather in a pocket and reuses it. People climb slowly there because speed is a rumor and the ground prefers not to be hurried. 2 raincoats lie folded nearby, folded with the politeness of guests who intend to return their chairs exactly as found. The men who wore them are lying still as if dawdling between stations, one hand beside each body like an unasked question. Over their eyes sit handmade masks cut from sheet lead, ovals with smoothed edges, less like armor and more like the sort of thing you make when you're trying not to be dramatic about your own science project. Everything looks ordinary, which is to say everything is wrong by only a degree or two. You could photograph this and send it to someone with no explanation, and they would probably reply, "Is it cloudy there?" The hill doesn't answer. Hills are famously radio silent. What we have is a path, 2 coats, 2 people, and a material chosen to stop light, which is an odd preference outdoors. If you have ever bought a roll of plumber's lead to patch a roof, you know it has the reluctant kindness of a very tired cat. It bends where you press and then remembers the handprint longer than you do. Lead dulls quickly. Within hours, it becomes the color of a sky that can't make up its mind. The masks show file marks and neat strokes, the way a hobbyist smooths a homemade spoon. They are not admirable so much as practical, no tassels, nothing that would snag on a zipper, no decoration at all. That absence is almost a design in itself, like a logo for seriousness. People have pointed out that lead blocks more than light. It blocks radiation rather heroically, which makes it a popular material in rooms that persuade X-rays to behave. It also blocks some expectations. Our eyes are built to collect light and gossip about it. Put a thin piece of the dull stuff between eye and sky, and you enter a different social arrangement with the world. If vision grows quiet, perhaps the other senses come forward with a cough. If you are not seeing the glare of sunset, you are listening for something at another wavelength. This is not mystical. It is the sort of thing radio people say with a straight face while soldering dot in one jacket pocket. There is a small notepad page. The graphite strokes stand up well to rain, as if the pencil knew it had an appointment with weather. The writing is clipped and tidy, not a confession, barely even a plan. More like the kind of checklist that technicians use when they prefer not to invent the wheel every day. 1630 be at the place. 1830 ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Someone took care to add the colons and the times. Someone was sufficiently exact to space the words as if they expected a colleague to read them. The note does not name a hill or a person. It trusts context to do the introductions. There is no capsule container anywhere, no cup, not even a ring of dampness that might hint at an orderly liquid. The page has a crease you can feel with your finger where it was folded once and tucked away. The pencil line at the very bottom wavers, where a hand likely lifted to tear the sheet free. You may feel, if you linger on details like a cat in a sunbeam, that the note belongs to a class of writing I think of as procedural whisper. It says, do the thing, then do the next thing, then clean up. It does not narrate, it does not ask why. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe to this peculiar genre of instruction. People who talk like this have been building bridges. rockets, and elaborate radios for more than a century. And their bedtime stories always come with parts lists stopped down the hill and across the city. Radios sing different weather. In the mid-20th century, Brazil buzzed with enthusiasts who pursued signals the way some people chase migratory birds. Notebook in one hand, coil of wire in the other, a willingness to be still but a talent for quick movements when a sound appears. A simple receiver contained small brass screws, mica capacitors that looked like confetti from a very polite party, and valves with a warm orange heart. The names of components were practically lullabies: ferrite rod, grid leak, heterodyne, superhet, the last of which sounds like a superhero who prefers tea to fame. Weather fronts turn the sky into an accordion. Lightning creates a chorus of static that makes long-distance stations shiver in your speaker like shy guests just outside the door. With patience, a firm hand on the tuning knob, and the occasional sacrifice of an evening social life, a listener might pull a voice from another continent and balance it like an egg on a spoon, carrying it all the way to midnight dot when storms rolled in from the Atlantic. The shortwave bands lit up with faint Europe, skittering America, the sleepy insistence of time signals, and the calm recitation of numbers by people who did not particularly want your company. To improve the odds, hobbyists built loops of wire, tuned them with salvaged variable capacitors, and rotated them like sunflower heads until a station swam into focus. A well-shaped loop rejects noise from one direction, like a person who has learned to ignore a persistent cousin at family gatherings. Some chase whistlers, those subterranean whistles that travel the magnetic lines of the earth and make the ionosphere sound like a glass harmonica with opinions. Others pursued meteors by listening for sudden pings as the sky briefly became mirrored metal. It was perfectly ordinary in that world to wear a pair of headphones that looked like wingnuts and listen for a tone while ignoring everything else, including dinner. The phrase "protect metals" would have meant nothing to them, unless you were talking about shielding, about keeping a signal pure. You do not need lat for that. Aluminum foil will do, and in emergencies a hat is optional. Masks that block light, however, suggest a different ambition. The eye is a loud organ. It interrupts often. Close it down, and you are left with the other senses humming along, ready to be consulted. People who build precise receivers talk about quieting the front end, which is a way of soothing the beginning of a circuit so that small, distant stations have a chance to be heard. Put a thin lead oval over your face and you have done something similar with biology. Not for fashion, not for symbol, for quiet. Of course, lead is heavy and it is not especially kind to skin. This is not a spa treatment. There is a limited number of reasons to lie down under a gray sky with metal over your eyes, and none of them are particularly loud. You might test a reaction to light, but evening was already doing that for free. You might hope to notice something above that did not wish to be seen except as a change in mood. If you are tempted to say UFO, you are in the same room as many people who have told this tale. But we do not need a saucer to enjoy the puzzle. A person can build an entire evening's calm with much less, a hill, a note, and the kind of patience that makes neighbors suspect you of having unusual hobbies. Plans like this grow in the loam, where technical curiosity and folklore share seeds. Somewhere in town, a seller wrapped capsules in paper and handed them across a counter. I imagine the package with the seriousness of a bakery box. Pharmaceutical history is full of perfectly ordinary compounds that become interesting when ingested with expectations. People took early tranquilizers to sharpen their focus, and finding themselves pleasantly less tense, mistook relaxation for revelation. The note's instruction in Just at 1830 has the crispness of a dinner reservation. It suggests punctuality both for chemistry and for whatever else was marked in an invisible calendar. You can picture the two men checking their wrists, not necessarily for watches. Sometimes you look at your wrist to convince time that you are thinking about it. After the effect, protect metals. This is an economical sentence. It means when you are affected, take care of your instruments. Wrap them, keep moisture away. The hill is damp, and dampness loves coils, switch contacts, battery terminals, all the tiny surfaces where corrosion writes its diary. It does not sound like a rite. It is closer to a lab habit, a small experiment taken outdoors to meet bigger variables. The price of such experiments is not always written in currency. There is the price of weather, which insists on joining the team, even when it is not invited. There's the price of time, 2 hours drawn with a pencil, and an expectation that they will behave. There's the price of carrying heavy batteries up a slope, which turns enthusiasm into a cardio plan. And there is the cost of doing science adjacent to rumor. The neighbors will smile and nod, and later, when asked by a reporter, they will have wonderfully different ideas about what you were doing. If you ever try to measure something at dusk, you know dusk has opinions. The light changes. Birds rehearse. Dogs circulate. Mosquitoes file their own paperwork. Dusk is when the sky finishes one job before returning a call from the stars. The gentlest reading of the note is that 2 technicians booked a field session, took something they believed would reduce jitter in their senses, and planned to wrap their gear afterward before Dew could claim it. This does not address everything, but it does not need to. We are trying to fall asleep, not to win a debate. Appointments with the sky are kept in silence. Hilltops are old-fashioned meeting rooms, clear lines of sight, neutral ground, a breeze that clears the agenda, everything except the agenda. In some cultures, technicians salute the horizon by setting up 2 sets of steps, mirrored, so each person can ascend their little ladder to adjust an antenna while staying level with a partner. You can imagine that here. 2 small stands, 2 radios perhaps resting on raincoats repurposed as tablecloths. 2 people who had practiced this at home and now wanted to do it properly with the performance that only distance can provide. The hill is a good choice for the same reason lighthouses are tall. Air up there behaves more like air you can negotiate with. If you are trying to meet a signal, the high place will meet you halfway. The times on the note indicate a sequence, the rendezvous, the ingestion, the protection, and there is a calm hope that something scheduled will occur. What arrives at such appointments may be human or not quite, meteorological or electrical or self-generated. If you have ever attended a planned eclipse with a crowd, you understand the feeling. Everyone knows the event is astronomical. Everyone also feels, in a low and not unpleasant way, that the sky is answering the letter you sent a long time ago. Appointments with the sky are kept in silence. Hilltops are old-fashioned meeting rooms, clear lines of sight, neutral ground, a breeze that clears the agenda, everything except the agenda. In some cultures, technicians salute the horizon by setting up 2 sets of steps, mirrored, so each person can ascend their little ladder to adjust an antenna while staying level with a partner. You can imagine that here. 2 small stands, 2 radios perhaps resting on raincoats repurposed as tablecloths. 2 people who had practiced this at home and now wanted to do it properly with the performance that only distance can provide. The hill is a good choice for the same reason lighthouses are tall. Air up there behaves more like air you can negotiate with. If you are trying to meet a signal, the high place will meet you halfway. The times on the note indicate a sequence, the rendezvous, the ingestion, the protection, and there is a calm hope that something scheduled will occur. What arrives at such appointments may be human or not quite, meteorological or electrical or self-generated. If you have ever attended a planned eclipse with a crowd, you understand the feeling. Everyone knows the event is astronomical. Everyone also feels, in a low and not unpleasant way, that the sky is answering a letter you sent a long time ago. After the search, paperwork arrives. Reports line up like obedient shoes outside a door. Autopsy forms use words that drive a comfortable distance between the examiner and the examined. Chemistry tests offer tables that read like restaurant menus for element sodium, potassium, magnesium, and neat milligrams per liter. When a test returns inconclusive, it does so with impeccable handwriting, so that uncertainty at least looks tidy. Neighbors mention bright nights and humming. They also mention having laundry to fold. In the file, you can assemble evidence like bookends and lean the story between them, yet anything fragile slides out. There's no vial, no cup. The weather claims responsibility for most mysteries, but not for that. The hill keeps its calm. The radios, whatever their fate, refuse interviews and cite mechanical law. People propose that the capsules were barbiturates. Others prefer something a pharmacist would raise an eyebrow at. The most reasonable answer remains the least charismatic. Whatever they took, it didn't kill them quickly, and perhaps it didn't kill them at all. The elements of the evening did what evenings do: cooled, complicated, encouraged the body to negotiate with itself while the mind stayed on the hill. Waiting. What remains after the papers settle is frequency. Not a sound you can pin to the air, but the habit of listening. Some mysteries fade because they are made of the same materials as gossip. Others remain because they are made of schedules and bolts. The lead masks are in storage now, cataloged and tagged in a box that probably smells faintly of museum, which is to say it smells like old paper and pledge. The note is copied and sealed, so multiple versions can be puzzled over without endangering the original's pencil crystals. The hill did not move. On wet days, it will still look like a place where experiments make friends with moss. Radio people continue to count seconds, and lightning continues to play percussion in the background at a volume controlled only by clouds. If you stand there at dusk, you can hear the old reports as if the wind were reading them under its breath. Elsewhere, headphones cup ears. A tone becomes audible, the sort you forget as soon as you turn your head. Stations still call the world's attention in their own languages. Time services speak with the patient courtesy of librarians. Number stations, if you care for such things, appear and vanish like moths that prefer mathematics. A person with a small loop of wire can find music at a frequency that has no audience except night birds and 2 or 3 people in kitchens who have accidentally discovered a fondness for foreign weather forecasts. You may fancy that the masks were built to cultivate this flavor of concentration, the decision to step away from sight and toward sound, which is not eccentric at all once you try it. Try it now for a breath. Close your eyes, listen to whatever is at the edge of hearing, the refrigerator discussing philosophy with itself, a car explaining its plans to a hill, your own pulse practicing minimalism, and notice how quickly the world rearranges its furniture to make room for the quiet visitor. The story has sharp edges if you run after them. It has rounded corners if you let it sit. 2 men planned a careful evening. They brought the kind of equipment that doesn't mind being rained on if you promise it a towel later. They wrote a schedule in a notebook. They folded their coats so the radios would have something comfortable to sit on. They tried a pharmacological nudge that they believed would hold their attention to one narrow beam. And then something did not return them to town on time. It may have been the simplest kind of error: dose, humidity, tiredness, the ordinary collaboration of small forces that make people fall asleep in inconvenient places. Or it may have been a look up into something soundless, the sky behaving like a confident host and then like a ruthlessly punctual one. The papers can't choose. We don't need to choose either. We can let the hill be a hill and the masks be a recipe for silence, and that is enough for bedtime. Because even now, if you tune a radio at sundown, you will find a tone just out of reach. It lives between stations like the unprinted part of a map. You can ride the knob back and forth, and the tone will move as if you were tickling it with a feather. It is not meaningful in the daily sense. It will not open a vault. It is simply there, a carry wave so steady that everything else borrows it for a while and then leaves it as it found it. If you're the kind of person who takes notes with colons in the Times, this is a comfort. The world is full of noise, but also full of carriers. The quiet thing that supports all the louder things is content to be ignored. Put a hand on the table. Notice the hum that is not quite a hum. That is the frequency that remains, the one a hill remembers even after the reports go home. If you're still awake, no hurry, let it do what tones do. Let it hold the place where a signal could be, while the rest of you drifts gently off channel and then, with any luck, out. You might not think a thread that lives on a bolt could change the way people sleep at night, but standard screw threads did exactly that, and very quietly. Before the 19th century discovered the soothing idea that one bolt should fit one. Not in more than one town, workshops were little islands with their own tiny dialects of grooved metal. A blacksmith in Leeds turned a spiral that made perfect sense to him, and his cousin in Bristol made another that was almost, but not quite, a cousin back. Imagine borrowing a teapot and being told that your water is the wrong shape. That was early industrial hardware. Bolts existed as shy individuals, uncomfortable at parties, arriving with nuts that spoke only their language. When machines traveled, they often had to carry their families of fasteners with them, like nervous tourists who bring their own tea bags. And at the end of the day, foremen hung keys and wrenches on nails while the night watchman walked past hissing steam, wondering if the morning crew would find the right spiral for the right hole. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe to the gentle pleasure of tiny angles and measured distances. Nothing happens fast here, except when a dropped bolt rolls under a bench at a speed that seems illegal. The early thread was a personal poem. A machinist chose an angle by feel, the way you might choose how much milk to pour in tea. 50 degrees looked elegant, 52 looked safer, 55 felt like a handshake. Pitch the distance between crest and crest, arrived by tradition or whim. Fine threads were for finesse. Coarse ones were for rough work and quick assembly. Anything in the drawer was for late Friday afternoons. Lathes cut spirals with a lead screw geared to the spindle, but the gear ratios were whatever. The shop owned whatever the owner's uncle had found at auction. If a piece broke on a ship, the engine room prayed its replacement was not the kind that had been made by a slightly poetic worker in another country. The archivists of early factories kept little notebooks of who cut which pitch on which day, in case something had to be remade. The notes read like weather clouds of 12 threads per inch rolling through June, a warm front of 11 in early July, and a brisk northerly of 13 by harvest. People who love tools learn to carry thread gauges, small fans of toothed leaves that hug a screw and whisper its identity. It was the first soft taxonomy for iron. Enter Joseph Whitworth, who had the rare skill of being precise without being loud about it. He spent years measuring, the way some people start gauze, not to dominate the sky, just to say hello to it properly. He collected samples of threads from across Britain and rearranged them on a table the way a botanist arranges leaves. He noticed that certain pitches felt natural for certain diameters, that 55 degrees made a nice tidy triangle, and that round. Roots and crests were kinder than sharp ones, because kindness matters even in metal. Sharp corners collect stress like gossip and eventually break under its weight. Whitworth did not invent screws. He invented a peace treaty for them. His 1841 proposal, a 55-degree angle, specified pitches tied to diameters, rounded tops and bottoms, and numbers you could write down without sighing, was essentially a lullaby for workshops. A bolt made in Glasgow could, in principle, Go on holiday to Manchester and still find companionship. Factories embrace this with the relieved smile of people who have been using slightly different spoons for too long. The Whitworth table marched into catalogs. Wrench sizes acquired names that matched across town lines. Drawers of mixed bolts stopped being archaeological sites and became more or less predictable. There were still holdouts. There always are. A few shops preferred the drama of idiosyncrasy and kept cutting their ancestral spirals because those spirals had carried their grandparents through difficult winters. But the tide of uniformity kept lapping, and it brought with it peace for purchasing agents. When a machine arrived from a distant city, it came with a vocabulary the local spanner understood. If you're yawning, that's appropriate. Yawning is the body's version of rounding the crest of its own 55-degree concerns. America, of course, looked at the English triangle and said, respectfully, we will try one that is a little pointier. William Sellers proposed a 60-degree thread with flat crests and roots. Not because flat is beautiful, but because flat is easier to measure with simple tools. This is an underrated beauty. Metrology is a philosophy of what you can do on a Thursday with a micrometer and a desk lamp. A flat crest can be measured, while a rounded one requires a certain interpretive spirit. Sellers' system became the U. S standard in 1864, and factories crossed their hearts and changed their dies. The transatlantic difference wasn't hostile. It was more like two cousins selecting different haircuts and then insisting politely that both looked fine. Ships built in New Jersey felt smug about the simplicity of their gauges. Railways built in Yorkshire felt correct about triangles. And bridge builders quietly stocked both sets of taps and dies just in case. After all, a bridge is a place where you want two sets of everything: bolts, opinions, and ways down dot. Meanwhile, on the continent, the metric system plodded calmly. Let us count threads, not by inches, it suggested with a sigh that smelled faintly of graph paper, but by millimeters between them. Metric threads kept the 60-degree angle, but spoke in the friendly language of 1.5, 2.0, 2.5 millimeter pitch. This did not so much simplify life as make the tables look extremely tidy. European drawers filled with screws labeled M8 times 1.25 like little library cards. Mechanics learned to say coarse for a pitch that matched a diameter's default, and fine for the thinner spiral that held more firmly. The miracle was not in the numbers. It was in the way the numbers traveled without changing clothes. A French bolt did not put on English shoes at Dover. It arrived, introduced itself as M10, and remained M10 all the way to Warsaw, where it continued to be M10 even after coffee. There is a special kind of calm in that. By late century, catalogs carried full-page tables that looked like hymnals. They listed diameters, pitches, tapping holes, clearances across flats, and the correct size of wrench to use if you had ambitions not to round anything off. Workshops ordered gauges cut to standards: Whitworth leaf fans here, Sellers there, metric everywhere else. A mechanic could identify a stray fastener by gently pressing a sawtoothed leaf against it, the way a tailor touches cloth to guess its weave. Thread pitch gauges are the language textbooks of the tool chest. They live quietly beneath sockets and are consulted in moments of doubt. A gauge will tell you, with the tender firmness of a librarian, whether you are holding a 24 threads per inch half-inch screw or merely imagining it. It prevents the sleepy mistake of forcing a near fit. There are few things sadder than a near fit in metal. It is like wearing someone else's glasses and insisting that, with time, they will become yours. Somewhere between these tables sits the humble tap and die set, the two-part poetry kit of Threaded World. A tap cuts the internal helical groove in a hole. A die cuts the external spiral on a rod. Turning a tap is a ritual of patience, quarter turn forward, Small rescind to break chips, another quarter turn, another polite retreat. The instructions have the rhythm of breathing exercises. Oil helps, and not because the tap is thirsty. Oil keeps the chip formation exemplary, like well-mannered students entering a lecture hall in single file. In school shops, apprentices learn to start the tap square because crooked threads are an aesthetic and philosophical problem. In home garages, people set dies too deep and accidentally produce the mechanical equivalent of tight handwriting. These are acceptable human errors. Machines built on such threads do not fail. They merely express personality. Crossing oceans changed nothing about the desire for predictability. Railway maintenance crews begged for one standard per yard, if not per planet. Naval yards grew fluent in multiple dialects because ships are cosmopolitan creatures. There is a satisfying micro-trivia here. British ships of the late 19th century often carried Whitworth threads. American ones cellars. German ones metric. And the repair pits kept all three languages close at hand like phrase books. The early 20th century then served a large helping of international committees, which are where standards go to get their passports stamped. Engineers in good suits met in quiet rooms to discuss angles that most of us see only with a magnifying glass. Yet their choices kept cranes holding, planes flying, and lawn chairs folding without argument during the wars. The world discovered a new preference for parts that could be replaced by strangers. The logic of field repair does not appreciate the poetry of custom spirals. You need a wheel to come off and go back on with whatever nuts the supply truck happens to carry. This is when unified threads appeared, a 60-degree family negotiated between Britain, the United States, and Canada so that soldiers could swap bolts without also swapping nationalities. Unified threads look like cellars with slightly more decorum, and they haunted toolboxes nicely alongside their metric cousins, who arrived later with European swagger and a taste for Allen keys. You can still hear the faint diplomatic conversations in modern kits, UNC, UNEF, and the proudly millimetric M-series living in the same plastic case like tenants, who share a laundry room and are polite about lint. Gauges improved while nobody was looking. Instead of guessing angles with a protractor and squinting at tiny teeth, machinists used plug gauges that said go and nitrogen monoxide go, which are comfortably absolute for such small objects. You slide a shiny steel plug into a threaded hole. If the go side goes and the nitrogen monoxide go side declines, then you have done a good job, and the gauge awards you a silent certificate of competence. Thread micrometers measure pitch diameter, the diameter that matters for fit in the mysterious interior of the thread, not the glamorous outer diameter that shows up in catalogs. These tools have names like three-wire method, which sounds like either a country song or a spy technique from 1952, but is only a way of touching a thread with 3 pieces of precision wire and reading a caliper with the serenity of a monk. Nothing explodes. Nothing even warms up. The loudest noise is a pencil filling in a box that says 0.4960 inch, which a small miracle exists in the real world. Meanwhile, the thread family is multiplied like careful rabbits. Pipe threads acquired taper, so they would seal themselves with a little extra squeeze and some polite sealant. Airplane fasteners received rolled threads rather than cut, because rolling flows the metal instead of removing it, leaving the grain unbroken and the bolt happier under stress. Left-hand threads continued to live where rotation would otherwise undo a fastener on bicycle pedals. Lawnmower blades, and the occasional stubborn jar by metaphor. When someone asks why that pedal unscrews the wrong way, you can answer, to disagree with the turning of its own world. It is a rare case where being contrary is mechanically generous. A lovely side effect of standard threads is the drawer. You can build a drawer in your life that holds a small packet of M61 bolts, a handful of quarter 20 UNC, a few 5/16ths with flat washers that look like sleepy moons, and you will be able to repair things your great-grandparents would have sighed at. Hinges give up. You offer them a new spiral. Lids crack. You offer them a little helicoil, which is a spring that pretends to be a thread, and through this theater becomes one. A helicoil is stagecraft in metal. You drill, tap, twist in a glittering coil. It settles, adopts the pitch, and invites a bolt to dance. When it's done properly, the repair is stronger than the original, which is not a moral lesson so much as a comfort. Weakness can receive a shape and become strong by joining a standard. There are worse bedtime thoughts. In museums, drawers of old hardware tell history slantwise. Curators put bolts side by side and the room gains accents. This one, a Whitworth, made perhaps near Manchester, and installed with a wrench that had seen the inside of mills. That one, Sellers, purchased from a catalog with a picture of a factory that promised to knock off the price if you ordered by the dozen. Here, metric with its clean fractions, visiting from a nation that loved geometry as a civil right. Each is a spiral written in dialect, and yet miracle. They will all travel futureward because human hands learned, at some cost and much discussion, to agree on how to turn. There is a mild joke most machinists share, that the difference between a good fit and a great fit is one pot of coffee. You cut to the number, you check, you drink. You try again with one more 0.5,000. You check again. The coffee is not for alertness, it is a small bribe to patience. Standards formalize patience so you don't have to feel it personally every time. They let the world borrow your care. And at the end of a day spent trimming small triangles into steel, you go home and turn the lid on a jar without noticing the miracle under your hand. The lid and the jar have agreed beforehand about how to behave. It is an agreement made by people who wrote tables and not manifestos, by people who kept their humor in drawers next to thread gauges. If you listen at night in a quiet house, you can hear tiny ratchets living their lives. A lamp base turns, a tripod locks. A kitchen chair sighs at a bolt that has decided to be steadfast one more season. Somewhere, someone uses a thread file, the humble comb that repairs. Damage spirals tooth by tooth, and it sounds faintly like a zipper apologizing. Near morning, a mechanic in a depot reaches for a gauge marked 1.25 millimeters pitch and finds it by touch, as if the drawer has learned their fingers. Far away, a bridge inspector puts a torque wrench on a nut the size of a teacup and waits for the click that means enough, and the click is the same in every language. The standard is not exciting. It is faithful. You might fall asleep before the last gentle fact that the angle of a thread is not a law of nature. 55 degrees versus 60 is a cultural mood, the difference between preferring a rounded story and preferring one with crisp corners. Both hold. Both let you take things apart and put them back. The miracle is not choosing. It is choosing once, writing it down, and letting a stranger on another continent make the same choice without calling you first. Threads are not dramatic. If they are, something has gone badly wrong. They are how complicated things admit they would like to stay together without a fuss. So rest, if you want. There will be bolts tomorrow, and they will turn the way they did today, neither heroic nor lazy, simply content in their grooves, carrying one quiet turn into another, and another until everything that needs to be held is held, and whatever needed loosening lets go with a small sleepy sigh. You might not expect a sheet of paper to have a favorite square root, but the A series does, and it has loved the square root of 2 with a devotion that borders on the cozy. Long before office printers hummed and sighed in afternoon light, before copy rooms learned the smell of faint worn toner, paper sizes were local customs with sharp elbows. A merchant in Paris wrote on one rectangle. A clerk in London folded a different one. A bureaucrat in Boston used something that looked similar, then refused to fit. Letters took on the shape of their town's mood. Cabinets filled with pages that needed trimming at the edges, like bangs that would never lie flat. Then a quiet idea drifted in, not with trumpets, but with a ruler and a gentle sense of proportion. What if a page could be cut in half and remain itself? Like a calm pond that reflects the same sky, even when a stone has made two ripples. If as you listen, you begin to enjoy rectangles at a suspiciously personal level, you can subscribe to this channel of very restful proportions, though truly, if you drift off before the end, the paper will still be here tomorrow, being rectangular at the same exact ratio without complaint. The seeds were planted by people who spent their evenings with compasses and squared paper while the rest of the world pursued louder hobbies. The square root romance became practical in the early 20th century when Germany's engineers, with their special affection for things that hum properly, gave the ratio a home address. DIN 476 formalized it. AO would have an area of exactly 1 square meter. From that calm lake, every smaller size would be made by having the previous, keeping the square root 2 aspect ratio intact. A 1, a 2, a 3, down to a 10 like a set of gentle matryoshka rectangles nesting inside a desk. The largest, AO, measures 841 by 1189 millimeters. A1 is half that area. A 4, the celebrity you probably met in school, is 210 by 297 millimeters, a page that feels right under the hand, even when you cannot say why. The numbers look arbitrary until you watch the halving happen. Cut a 3 and you get a 4 south that keep the same slender dignity as their ancestor. You can fold in a 4 along its long side and a 5 appears, as if the paper simply remembered a smaller version of itself. Printers adore this because layouts reduce cleanly. Photocopiers adore this because a 71% reduction takes in a 4 down to a 5 exactly. No drama, no pleading. Binders adore this because holes line up with a kind of bureaucratic tenderness. There are odd small facts that live beside these rectangles, like coins in the pocket of a jacket you forgot you owned. An O poster weighs the same number of grams as the grams per square meter of the paper stock itself. 80 grams per square meter. Paper yields an 80-gram AO, as if the sheet is congratulating the units for finally getting along. And a 4 on that stock weighs exactly 5 grams, almost nothing, just enough to flutter with authority when waved. The diagonal of any A-series sheet is exactly the width of the size 2 steps up, a relationship that seems contrived until you realize it keeps printers honest. When countries began to adopt the A-series, most of the world looked at the tranquil geometry and said yes. It was like choosing a bedtime story that finally made every child drowsy at the same page. Offices found they could send forms across borders, and the boxes would still be boxes when they arrived. In filing rooms, folders and sleeves stopped making passive-aggressive comments about width. Envelopes learned their lines. DL envelopes tall and slim happily folded A4S in thirds. C5 South let in a 4 fold once and relax. C4 South asked no folding at all and meant it for the days when a document deserved to travel, with its creases unbroken like a well-pressed shirt. Meanwhile, North America opted to keep its letter size, officially 8.5 by 11 inches. A dimension invented by a papermaker's comfortable reach, and then promoted nobly into tradition. Letter is not wrong. It is simply a different lullaby. The ratio is 1.294 instead of 1.414, which means halving is not self-similar, and photocopiers produce a faint shiver at the edges when asked to play nicely. There is a universal office experience of taking a document designed for a 4, printing on letter, and discovering that a crucial paragraph has wandered near the bottom margin like a sheep. The fix is not difficult scale to 94%, whisper reassurance, but the sheepishness persists. At this point, if you are still awake, you may enjoy this very self-call to curiosity. A subscription buys you more rectangles than you will ever need, and none of them will argue. You can fold along any A-series long edge and earn the next size down. You can, With a ruler, draft the square root to rectangle from the corner of any notebook. You can also simply close your eyes and imagine a paper that becomes itself whenever you divide it, like a melody played an octave lower. If you are not awake, the paper understands and does not take it personally. Printers, binders, and stationers quietly choreograph their products around these sizes. The 3-hole punch that marks across an A4 sheet does so with a standard 80mm spacing. A 2-hole punch splits the page at 80mm from the top and bottom and stands back with the modesty of a stagehand. Filing cabinets in places where 4 reins measure their internal width to cradle it at a whisper under 300mm. So the papers slide but do not wobble. Rails sit exactly apart for suspension files that hold their hanging hearts with steel bars. Labels arrive pre-cut to widths that even a sleepy hand can place straight. Spiral notebooks promise the same. Their perforations are sized so you may tear without drama. The tear line shows that it is possible to engineer a softness, strength up to a point, surrender at a dotted promise. Pens feel longer on a 5 than on a 4, which has nothing to do with physics and everything to do with the way a hand spans a page. These are the unimportant facts that make a day smooth. Text manuals discovered a funny trick. When you design on a 4 and export for viewing on a screen, scaling to a 5 produces a book that feels right in the hands. Scale again and a 6-pocket guide appears, ready to live in a jacket. Printers know these numbers by muscle memory. 70% they say to themselves, trimming with their eyes, and the proof lands correct. Photocopiers even carry little percentage buttons, 71%, 141%, that echo this geometry, as if the machines have learned a few words in the language of paper and are eager to practice. The more you use it, the more you notice that the A series is not a set of sizes. It is a method of doing less work next time. Beyond the A series lie the harmonized cousins, the B series for posters and trim sizes that sit between, the C series for envelopes that accommodate a series sheets without either sulking or slouching. A B5 book fits very nicely in a C5 envelope, and a 4 folded to thirds slides into a DL. There is a small joy in this modular life. You can, with a mild sense of ritual, prepare a report in a 4, tuck it into a C4, address it in tidy letters, and post it with the confidence of someone who knows the envelope will not stage a drama halfway through the journey. Even packaging follows this hush. Archival boxes are sized so that a 4 folders settle inside, the way a blanket knows the length of a bed. Office supply catalogs print the sizes in tiny grid tables, and somewhere a purchasing manager, who will never be famous, feels a private peace when the numbers align. Schools transmit this geometry as if by osmosis. Children learn that a 4 is every day, a 3 is for posters, a 5 is for small booklets or exam booklets that rustle at exactly the right speed. Teachers fold a 4 in half to hand out permission slips, and the slips, now 5, look correct even when nobody mentions the square root of 2. Copy rooms replicate recipes of the halving magic every hour. Someone needs a seating chart larger than life. The copier obliges by stitching 4A4 south into an A2 with thin white borders that wait for tape like picture frames. Exhibition designers know that an AO makes a credible wall map without daring to shout, and that 4A0s tiled become a world. The routine remains the same: cut, fold, scale, repeat, with no mysterious stretching. In homes, the A series finds its quiet jobs. A pile of A4 letters forms a stack that satisfies the poem. 2 folds make a greeting even the frugal feel generous about. School notices align in refrigerator magnets without corners trying to escape. Recipe binders become home libraries because the pages do not fight the pockets. Household printers, those small, patient creatures, are happiest when fed an A4 diet. And on the odd day you decide to print 2 pages per sheet to save paper, you discover that too, A5 layouts rest on an A4 without the edges peeking beyond acceptable borders, which is the paper equivalent of finding a bus seat with exactly 2 agreeable armrests. There's tenderness even in recycling. Shredders accept A4 with a confidence born of routine. Boxes fit reams in 5s, 500 sheets at a time, stacked like the layers of a quiet cake. On the wrapper, the weight and size and whiteness index all sing from the same hymn. If a sheet jams, and it will, because machines like attention, it does so along lines that can be predicted, and the maintenance page of the manual will depict a little cartoon hand removing the page at exactly the right angle. You will follow the drawing without thinking, because the standardized shape makes your own hand cleverer. Travelers learn the contrast between systems the way gourmands compare breads. In Europe or most of Asia, you move through a world calibrated to 210-297 millimeters. Folders and stationers' windows announce a 4 with the calm confidence of a utility bill. In North America, letter refuses to be left out, and its dominance ensures the existence of small accessories with names like a 4 filing tray, letter compatible, which are either compromises or bridges depending on your mood. Airport copy centers keep both sizes because contracts cross oceans and rectangles. Like people gain second passports when useful. The truly jet-lagged can tell where they are by the feeling of a magazine in their hands. A metric publication has that slender dignity. An imperial one feels slightly wider. A rectangle that had 1 extra pastry at lunch. Neither is wrong. But one family halves like a dream. My favorite fact is so small you can carry it into sleep without noticing the weight. If you take an A0 sheet and fold it to a 1, to a 2, to a 3, to a 4, the number of folds equals the index number. You can count the day with folds: a poster morning, a broadsheet noon, a desk work afternoon, a pocket evening. Somewhere, a press operator measures the thickness of a ream with a caliper and predicts how many minutes the feeder will run before the next reload. Only a person who loves calm machines finds this romantic, but those people exist, and they are very restful to talk to. They will tell you that a 4 is not really the hero. The hero is the aspect ratio that allows machines to be boring, and boring is a tremendously underrated virtue. It is also oddly human. The A series assumes we will want to make something smaller later, or larger, and that we will not want to think about it very hard when the moment comes. It is a system that forgives indecision. You make handouts in a 4. Someone asks for a booklet. You print 2 up and fold, and the booklet appears like a well-behaved cat. You draw a floor plan on a 3. Someone asks for a wall copy. You scale to a 1 and the nice white margins translate themselves without fuss. You mail a certificate in a C4 to avoid creases. Somebody frames it on a wall that was already ready for a 4, and nothing is offended. Even the names sound soporific. A 0, a 1, a 2, like counting down to sleep. B5, C6, numbers that pad quietly to the end of the hall and pull a door to without a click. In the background, the square root of 2 holds everything at the same tilt. The recline angle of a good chair, the comfortable lean of a book spread on a table. Offices close, and on desks lie pages fanned at 45 degrees for tomorrow, with paperweights that are small stones or gift shop glass domes with trapped snow. Printers cool, and their internal fans sound like an exhale. Somewhere on a windowsill, a half-folded A4 waits to become a shopping list. The page does not mind what is written on it. It minds only the proportions, which it keeps quietly, the way your breathing keeps time for your thoughts. So yes, a sheet of paper has a favorite square root. It learned it from mathematicians who admired tidy transformations, from engineers who smiled at self-similarity, and from stationers who just wanted shelves to line up. The result is a life of rectangles that cooperate. If you need to cut your worries in half, the paper will show you how and look exactly the same afterward. If you need to expand a small thought into a larger one, it will grow cleanly. And if the day asks nothing of you at all, you can take a 4, fold it to a 5, fold again to a 6, tuck it in a pocket, and let the quiet geometry of it ride with you like a steady breath, having, until the night has finished its careful work, and the world, for a while, is all margins. You might not expect a quiet hill with wet grass to contain 2 identical afternoons, but Vintem manages it, one for the people who climb, and one for the radios that never quite stop. The path up is narrow, almost polite, the kind that lets plants keep their opinions. In a drizzle, your shoes find the same shallow divots that others did, and the sound of water on leaves sets the tempo for thoughts that do not want to hurry. Somewhere below, buses cough, but the hill keeps its own schedule. Near the top, the air goes a degree cooler, as if the horizon opened a window just to see who came. 2 raincoats wait there in the grass, folded with a patience you usually reserve for laundry you promise to put away. 2 men lie nearby, hands resting by their sides, faces covered with ovals of homemade lead, the edges smoothed by someone who cared about edges. It is not an alarming scene if you adjust your expectations. It is symmetrical, which is gentler. If you are still awake in a few minutes, you are welcome to follow this channel into other symmetrical places, but truly, if the rain on the leaves gets to you first, you can subscribe when you wake up, and we will pretend it happened earlier. The lead masks are without straps, just shaped to fit, like a calm idea pressed into metal. They say nothing about motives. Metal is famously quiet on that subject. On the men, the rest is ordinary. Shirts, trousers, shoes with the usual scuffs, a sense of having planned to return those coats to the car later. The small details stacked neatly, a wristwatch that did its best. A tie knotted in a way that suggests neither interview nor funeral. Pockets that contain the kinds of things pockets contain when you trust the day to behave: keys, a bit of money, the outline of a pencil. It is the pencil that matters because nearby, someone has folded a notepad page twice and then once again, the way you fold instructions when you intend to follow them but don't want them flapping. The paper is dry only in the parts that were inside. The graphite stays legible, a practical miracle. The sort that happens when the weather respects how clearly a person has written. The words are plain, be at the place at 16:30, ingest capsules at 18:30, after the effect, protect metals. The handwriting is tidy and not dramatic. There are no underlines, no exclamation marks, no theological exhalations. It reads like you would write the steps for servicing an antenna or recording a solar eclipse. Times first, then verbs, then a small reminder about gear. If the page had included return library books, it would not have felt out of place. It does not explain the masks. The note assumes you already understand the masks, which is a charming but unhelpful personality trait for a note. The path, the page, the raincoats, the lead ovals. The stillness taken together, they feel like a problem whose answer used to be obvious before lunch. People who knew the men described them as radio enthusiasts, a phrase that always sounds like a polite way of saying the air had their attention. Radio people study the sky the way gardeners study soil, less for the beauty and more for the conditions. They listen for short waves that jump off the ionosphere like a skipping stone. They wait for a particular broadcast the way others wait for bread to rise. At the time of day written on the note, atmospheric layers are changing their minds. Heat drifts away from the ground and the upper air stops being quite so busy. Signals that were unruly at noon begin to hold still. For short stretches, a faraway voice can sound as if it is speaking from the next room, and the next room is inside a metal box you built yourself. An enthusiast learns to read a map made of frequencies. They write down minute marks and band conditions with an earnestness that turns numbers into weather. Storms do strange favors to radio. Lightning stutters a static that is musical once you accept that music I send to obligate it to be pleasant. A cold front drops the noise floor like a librarian with a fondness for quiet. Sunspots scatter the bands, and then unexpectedly order them. You can picture these men before the hill, calibrating dials by ear, making notes about flutter and fade as calmly as if they were discussing coffee. Coils, valves, and solder points become the whole vocabulary. You cannot hear a resistor, but you will swear you can. Some radio operators keep their fingernails short because wire has opinions. Some keep a small screwdriver in the breast pocket as if it were a fountain pen for a language without letters. In their world, the time says, now is good for Portugal, not for Peru. In their world, metal is comfort, which makes the line, protect metals, sound less like chemistry and more like hospitality, a reminder to cover the thing that hears. The masks themselves are practical in their way. Lead blocks light that has too much energy. It blocks other travelers in the electromagnetic family if you give it enough thickness. It blocks expectation most of all. Behind the ovals, the eye cannot do its usual thing of finding a pattern and then disliking it. It cannot compare the shape of a cloud to an animal. It cannot announce that evening is coming and we should hurry. The masks life hack the brain into listening with a narrower beam. They are heavy, but clarity often is. There is a long tradition of people putting objects over their faces to focus on something else. The monk's hood, the welder's visor, the beekeeper's veil. This is that, only steadier. And it is not only superstition. Screens around radios cut down interference from nearby lights. Covers around Geiger counters keep them from chattering about the wrong kind of noise. A lead sheet on a face is absurd right up until you remember that eyes notice more than you ask them to. The capsules, too, have their own little absence. None were found. The instruction includes them, like an appointment that, alas, ate itself. The pockets do not. People speculate about barbiturates or stimulants or something in between things that promise steadier hands or a calmer heartbeat. A number of such helpers were sold in ordinary pharmacies at the time, in bottles that made unhurried claims. A person would take one and feel that their posture had improved. If the men meant those, the omission is mundane. 2 pill vials in one place, 2 vials in another. A narrative unspooled by rain and the commute. If they meant something more exotic, they had the courtesy not to cause a scandalized pharmacist to be pulled into the story. I prefer the pharmacy version. It involves receipts that nobody will check and a clerk who recommends water with the smallest nod. One more note from the paper. The timing is too tidy to belong to a ritual that relies on sunsets and saints' days. It sounds more like a maintenance window. At 16:30, be at the place. That gives you an hour to set up a chair, let the radio warm like a well-behaved oven, consult the clouds, check the spare battery, and negotiate with the insects. At 18:30, ingest capsules. In the temperate zone that is the insomnia hour for stations, just when the day loses its grip and the night has not yet found its workplace voice. It is also when the air cools enough that you notice metal on the skin. The men should have had a thermos. They had raincoats instead. After the effect, protect metals, wrap the radio in cloth, cover the batteries, stow the headphones. The note does not say help each other down the hill, but a good instruction manual assumes you will not forget compassion. Here the hill returns to the story like a patient stage manager. Vintem is not high, but it acts tall. It lifts you just above the noise of the day, above the tangle of wires, above the humming transformers, above the argument between a bus and a corner. The view at the top is open, the sort of open that makes you say, there without a noun. Radio people like sight lines, even though their signals do not need them as often as old habits assume. A clear horizon is as reassuring as a tidy workbench. 2 men would have felt they had come to the right place, especially if the rightness was also an agreement to meet someone who had not been on the bus. Appointments that involve the sky are a subtle genre. Astronomers have them with the moon. Meteorologists have them with the afternoon. Pilots have them with everything at once. This appointment could have been with a test signal, an agreed tone, or a sweep carried from a van parked unseen on a road below. It could have been with a third person who did not arrive, because third people sometimes dawn. It could have been with a phenomenon, a predicted opening on a band, a skip that bridges impossible distances the way a bridge is a story about stone and hope. In any case, the hill gives every appointment the same courtesy. It holds the air steady and listens. After the search comes with clipboards and careful shoes. The coats are folded in a way that suggests the owner planned to wear them again. The watches are stopped at times that are accurate enough to argue for coincidence. The notepad page is copied and then copied again because everyone insists on keeping the original. Very safe and simultaneously wants to look at it. The headphones, if there were any, are not present. The radio sets, if there were any, are not either. Two men without their radios is like two fishermen without their lines, but accidents remove the very things you expect them to leave. In the same way that misplacing your keys often moves the bowl you designed to keep you from misplacing your keys. Autopsy reports are precise and still. They list compounds they can locate and waver gently over those they cannot. Neighbors speak about bright lights in the sky and a humming noise on some nights that turned the dogs thoughtful. Whether those nights were the same nights is a matter of whose calendar remembers better. The photographs are dot grain and rain soft. They show a hill that could be any hill, which is the kindest result a hill can wish for. Investigators note the absence of practical things that should have been nearby and make lists that do not quite resolve. A theory about spiritualism trips on the way it spells capacitor. A theory about espionage arrives late and yawns. A theory about friendship suggests that two men who were used to working side by side simply chose to be side by side once more while the sky sorted itself out. All three theories are tidy for 5 minutes each. Then the files are labeled and shelved the way files are. And if a junior clerk leaned an elbow on the stack and felt a soft pulse of curiosity, that too was filed under Tuesday. What remains after forms and polite interviews is frequency. The men organize their evening by it. The note describes events as if they were steps on a dial. Even the line about metals reads like a field operator's instinct. After the transmission, cover the gear. After the observation, protect the instrument. Museums do this with telescopes, with old clocks, with stones from the moon. The masks are tagged and stored. The page is sealed with the gravity reserved for documents that can be explained and those that cannot equally. The hill keeps its weather. The radios, wherever they ended, keep their silence or their tune, depending on whether someone plugged them in and listened. People who live near Vintem still talk about the place because hills collect stories the way receivers collect static. On certain nights, someone says, a humming crosses the houses and asks for no attention at all. It sounds like distant power lines remembering their youth. The weather stations say nothing unusual. The insects disagree in a chorus and then move on to other opinions. A teenager climbs to the top with a portable set and hears a faint voice counting in Spanish. 1, 2, 3, 4, the eternal rehearsal, and they decide it is probably a number station and probably from somewhere ordinary, and even if it is not, the numbers are warm company in an open place. This is the part of history that prefers to end in ellipses because full stops would need a villain or an aha, and we have neither. We have two men who liked radios, two coats folded, two masks that are heavy but somehow comforting, a note that could nearly be a recipe, a hill that does lenient work for anyone who leaves the city for an hour to hear the air. It is very possible they planned an experiment they had run before with capsules that were not so much dramatic as routine, and that the hill and the damp and the timing conspired, as uncomplicated things sometimes do, to turn intent into aftermath. It is very possible something else happened. The weather kept no diary. The radios, if they replied, did so on a frequency that was in service that day and retired the next. What endorses the practice of listening with fewer distractions than usual. The masks are only the flamboyant version of that. You can, even without metal, sit somewhere a breeze has chosen and do almost nothing for an hour while what you hope to hear decides whether it belongs to you. You can write a small list before you go be at the place at 16:30. At 18:30, take the tea out of the thermos. After the effect, protect the notebook, and you will have reenacted the most human part of the story, the modest choreography. It rarely leads to headlines. It often leads to a feeling that something almost spoke. If you find this restful, the hill is working on you the way it worked on them. It did not demand that anyone believe anything in particular. It offered height and the version of quiet that still includes insects. Even now, if you walk up, you will see the grass has done what grass always does. Reclaim the outlines until they are only good for telling the difference between now and a year ago. In late light, every hill resembles every other hill, the way every radio voice, after a while, sounds like someone you know. You do not have to understand the message to be glad that it arrived. By dusk, rainfall thickens to the sound of folded aluminum. A radio tone far away becomes the same tone you heard earlier because tones have that habit. The note, wherever it rests, still has room on the margin to write another time, another small instruction. The masks sit in their wrapping like moons that someone filed into shape in a tidy apartment, and you can imagine the filing swept carefully into a tin, the floor then mopped because lead is not welcome on linoleum. The hill breathes out. The city turns on its lights, one report at a time. And somewhere, perhaps on a band most of us do not visit, a carrier wave holds steady, patient as a porch light, waiting for two listeners who knew how to say hello and then, without fuss, how to listen.